C-SPAN, more relevant than ever.
View of government, created by America's cable television companies as a public service, and brought to you today by your television provider. Washington Journal continues.
Our first guest this morning is Dwayne Bryant. He's the author of the book, The Stop, Improving Police and Community Relations. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, good morning. It is great to be here. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Could you tell our audience, because they're unfamiliar with you, largely your background when it comes to law enforcement issues?
Sure. Well, my background in law enforcement issues, I am an alumni of the FBI Citizens Academy. I'm also on a community advisory board for COPA, which is the Civilian Office of Police Accountability in Chicago. I've also done a couple of town hall meetings with the former superintendent of Chicago Police Department, Eddie Johnson, in Chicago. I've also had the privilege of speaking in Virginia with 7 different police departments, as well as in Harrisburg.
And so the title of your book, because it deals with issues of improving police and community relations, how would you characterize those relations as they stand today?
Well, if anyone has 2 eyes and 2 ears and a half a brain, they can see that those relationships are very strained. Right now, police and community relations are probably at an all-time low, and it's a human problem, so therefore it will require a human solution.
Would you say that the status, or at least that range of relationship, has always been the same for many years, that it's only different this year because of recent events, or what's changed over time?
Well, the reality is, if you understand history, the history of police and the Black community relations has always been strained because it actually started with slave patrols of police or militia going out to seek a runaway, and therefore was always going to be a confrontation. So that relationship has always been strained. I think what we're seeing now, the proliferation, is because we have cell phones and we can see it almost on a weekly basis. So I think it's been tense all along, but now we can see it. And once you can see something, then you realize just how bad or how good it is.
So when you say the word, the stop, as suggested in your title, it's actually an acronym. What do you mean by that? Sure.
So the stop, everyone is like, oh, it's a police stop. Yes, but it's more. The STOP, S-T-O-P, stands for Support the Teaching of Principles. My company has been providing mentoring programs for well over 35,000 youth in Chicago as well as in Florida. And so we believe that if you support the teaching of principles, this whole tension between police and community will be eliminated. For instance, some of the schools we worked in, right, like 20% of the students constitute at least 70 to 80% of all the suspensions. When we look at different police reports, like the Invisible Institute in Chicago, 20% of law enforcement officers have 10 or more complaints. That represents over 70% of all the complaints, or 80%, and the police force is done by 20% of the police officers. So there's a correlation between the work that we do as children and what I'm seeing now in the real grown-up world. And so just like we can fix it in the schools, we can also fix it in the police department.
So as far as then a specific principle, what's the overriding principle in your mind amongst the suggestions and advice that you give?
Oh, that's a great question. So integrity, trust, honesty, open and honest communication. Those are the principles that we teach, as well as transparency. So those are the things that if both police and the community operated with those principles, I can guarantee you will 100% reduce the likelihood of someone getting shot, a fatality that's unnecessary.
We live in an age where there's a debate going on as far as taking amounts of budgets from police forces and maybe turning them into social programs or social officers to interact with various of communities. Does this follow along with what you're advising? And if that's the case, how does that work best?
Sure. Well, defunding is one of the reform strategies. I'm not necessarily for police defunding. However, I am for strict accountability. I am not for funding police forces that the Department of Justice have already decreed they have a pattern and practice of violating human constitutional rights. They have a pattern and practice of shooting unnecessarily at citizens. They have a pattern and practice of just doing many different things that law enforcement officers are not sworn to do. So in those particular cases, if those law enforcement agencies are not upholding their oath, then we should look at how they're funded. Do we need more social workers on the force? Do we need to restructure how they're being funded? Because I don't think, excuse me, anyone in their right mind believe we should be paying and funding criminal organizations that have badges to enforce different unnecessary practices in communities.
Go below the criminal organizations that have badges. What do you mean by that? Are you talking police forces directly?
What I mean by that is simply this. I believe the majority of law enforcement officers are good, decent people. I do believe that. I still believe that. I also believe there's an element. Some people say, I was on Fox and they said it's about 10%. I think it's closer to 20%, maybe even more. So if you have 20% of your officers who are engaging in patterns and practices that dehumanizes a community, that profiles a community, then we're paying the salaries of law enforcement officers that are destroying communities. Now, the FBI has stated that many neo-Nazis and white supremacist organizations or individuals have infiltrated law enforcement. So if that police officer is showing up to me, I'm educated, I mean no harm to anyone, and they are going to either kill, destroy, or figure out a way to destroy me, then I don't think we should be funding them, quite frankly, and they are a liability to the American public.
Dwayne Bryant joining us. He's the author of The Stop, Improving Police and Community Relations. If you want to ask him questions about his book and some of the themes that he's talked about, you can call us on the lines, 202-748-8000 in the Eastern and Central time zones, 202-748-8001 in the Mountain and Pacific time zones. And if you are a member of law enforcement, 202-748-8002. You can also text the slots at 202-748-8003. Mr. Bryant, I'm sure there have been a lot of books and studies and the like on this type of issue. What made you, why did you want to enter into this issue?
Sure. Here's the answer to that. I was doing a workshop in Chicago on the South Side with 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. I asked a simple question. If you're on a playground playing, minding your own business and doing nothing wrong, if a police car drove over, what would you do? My students said, run. Two of the bigger boys said, I would not run, but if they disrespect me, I'm going to disrespect them. I said, why would you run? These babies said, because we don't want to get shot, we don't want to get harassed, and we do not want to get stopped from going home. As a grown man talking to 4th, 5th, and 6th graders, I realized we have a major problem in this country. And when I was a child, I didn't have that level of fear, but I did not see what they see on a weekly basis with law enforcement. So my goal was, what can I do? I've been working with young people for over 2 decades, but what can I do with my life, with my time on this planet to ensure that they do not have to have that fear for the rest of their lives? So I wanted to get involved for them. Also, I know a lot of great officers. My father was a police officer, and I also wanted to be able to represent the great men and women in blue who are doing a wonderful job, who's also, their name is being stained by what's going on.
And before we let you take calls, you recount in your book right off the bat, at an early age, you had an encounter with the police that I suppose shaped a lot of what you do today. What is that?
Sure. So I had a police encounter. My brother and I, mom, single parent mom, 6 children, because my father left at 2 years old. We would run after school, jump on some of the students' bikes, and just ride around because my mom was always late picking us up and bring the bikes back. This particular day, we jumped on a couple of bikes that were brand new, apparently. And when the child came out, they called their parents. The parents called the police. The police were looking for people who stole their bikes. My brother and I had borrowed bikes. And so as we were headed back to the school, the police put his sirens on behind us and said, hey, what are you guys doing? We're like, hey, officer, you know, we're just riding some friends' bikes. What are the names of your friends? The names? So we didn't know. So he said, those bikes are stolen. And we said, no, officer, they're not stolen. We're just riding right now. So my mom drives up and say, hey, what's going on? So she's talking to the police officer, and he says, ma'am, your children have stolen these bikes. And you know, if you black and your mama give you that look, you know that look that your mama just gave you. We weren't afraid of him. We were more afraid of her. And so when she gave us that look, we're like, Mom, we didn't take anything. And she was like, whose bikes are these? And then he said, ma'am, I want to make sure your sons do not steal again. And she said, officer, please don't put your handcuffs on my boys, and please don't put them in the back seats of your car. And he said, well, what are you going to do to stop them from stealing again? She said, I'm going to beat their swiggle so good that they will never steal from anyone for the rest of their life. And he said something interesting. He said, I don't want you to beat your children. And my mom said, well, I'm going to beat them before you beat them with your billy club or before you shoot them in their backs. And we were like, what? Shoot it? What? Why would we get shot in our backs for riding some bikes? Guess what? We didn't have a clue as to what my mom knew that day, but every child in America, black, white, and Hispanic, knows exactly what my mother was talking about. So what happens is, in this wonderful book, I tell about 7 different encounters I've had with law enforcement. So I tell what happened, but then I talk about what would have happened if my brother and I jumped off the bikes and started running. What would have happened if my mom was rude, ignorant, and belligerent and started cursing the officer out? What would have happened if this police officer was a racist and wanted to dehumanize us? So I teach that everyone is responsible for the police encounter. We put all the onus on the police, but they're not the only ones responsible. We also have a responsibility as well. However, they have the majority of the responsibility because they're trained, they've been to the academy, and they've sworn to protect and uphold the law. So in the book, there's many different encounters. Some of them could have ended in death. Some of them I have a gash in the back of my head, which is chapter 4, because of that encounter, which was a riot. Not a riot, it was a demonstration I participated in Miami, Florida with the Haitian community. And so the last encounter was Officer Weller in Indiana. He was a great officer. That one went viral. So that's what the book is about.
Let's go to calls from Trona, California, starting us off. Harold, you're on with our guest, Dwayne Bryant. Go ahead with your question or comment.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of police officers through the years and everything, and a lot of the fatal police shootings are due to because that's the way they're trained. And it comes down from the top, from the mayors, supervisors, district attorneys, everybody else, that they are taught to shoot if they're going to pull their gun because of liabilities and settlements, and liabilities they have to pay more, so they're taught to shoot twice in the torso, once in the head. And this is what I've heard from a lot of officers and stuff. And it's just that it just comes down from the top, and so much of this is getting laid on the officer. And because they have a code that they don't want to say things and stuff, probably a lot of them won't say that, but that's the way it is, that they're taught, they're trained at the academy to shoot like that if they're going to draw their weapons, because they don't want a liability. The city doesn't want a liability.
Okay. Harold in California, thank you. Mr. Bryant, go ahead.
Well, here's what's interesting about that. I'm concealed and carry in 38 states, and the gentleman who trained me was a police officer, and he did say, if you're going to pull your gun, you do not pull your gun to brandish it or to show off or to issue a threat. You pull your gun to, quote unquote, neutralize the threat, and you continue shooting until the threat is neutralized. So I hear what he's saying, and 2 to the chest and 1 to the head. That sounds more like a Jason Bourne movie. That's kind of scary to me, because most police officers don't shoot that well to start with, so I doubt they're going to hit you in the head. But let's go back to what he said. The liability portion. That is a myth, because in Chicago, from 2004 to 2020, Chicago has paid out nearly $1 billion in police misconduct. If I'm black, if I'm white, if I'm any race, and I know that my taxpayer dollars is going to pay $1 billion because police are not trained properly. They're shooting at moving vehicles, which is against policy. They're using untactical, unsound police practicing and discharging their firearms. That's a problem. But I do agree, the second thing he said is that it's not so much of the officers. We have to look at the police department, the chiefs, as well as one big elephant in the room is the unions. The unions get paid to shield and protect their police officers, no matter how terrible of a police officer they are. Some police officers, quite frankly, need to be fired. I'll say that again. Some police officers need to be fired. They are not fit for the force, and they are more of a liability in these communities than they are an asset. When police departments get serious about those police officers, Derek Chauvin, he had over 17 complaints. Jason Van Dyke, who murdered Laquan McDonald in Chicago, he had dozens of complaints. So why are those police officers staying still on the force? Because the unions protect them. And I've talked to police chiefs who want to get rid of police officers, and many times they can't.
Akron, Ohio. James is up next. Hi.
Yes, before I make a statement, there's one thing that I just don't understand, and I hear it all the time, and most of the time it's white people that haven't had any confrontation with the police, and they always say that most people get shot because they don't obey the orders of the police. And the thing about that, the tone of voice that the police use when they talk to black people, when they pull you over or whatever the situation is, far different than what it is when the way they talk to white people. And I've been present in both situations with the white gentleman that was speeding. I happened to be riding in the back seat, the only black in the car, and they let him go with a warning. But the way they approached it was far different. When they come to the black person's car, they come with a belligerent type of an attitude, and so automatically, if you are a man, I don't care what race you are, there's a tone of voice. You don't just talk to another man just like he's a kid. And so you owe them a little bit of respect. But here's the statement that I want to make about the police, is that I have a couple good friends that's the police, and I have a niece that's a policeman, and I have a grandson that's a policeman. But I know firsthand about the situations, what goes on in the departments, and they're not going to cross the line as far as telling what went on in a situation. They'll pick the one guy that they know that's going to make the kind of report that they want, and that's the person in charge of making the report.
Okay,
James,
let me let you stop you there. I apologize for that. We've got to get more calls in, but Mr. Bryant, take what James has brought to the table and go ahead.
Sure. Well, Brother James is right on point. Let's be real. We've all seen the videos of the white guy. He jumps out of the police car. He's fighting with two police officers. He grabs their billy club. He hits the police officer, and then he takes the police car and drive down the street, where the whole time the police are, stop, wait, no. If that was my black behind, I guarantee you I'd had 2 bullets to the chest, 1 to the head, 1 to the back, and about 12 in my toe. So white people do treat white people differently. Implicit bias, explicit bias, those are words that most police departments are beginning to understand. But the reality is everyone treats people differently based on the way you were raised, the way you were brought up. So those police officers who are afraid of white people, they are a liability on the police force if they're patrolling black neighborhoods. Police officers who are inherently racist, and many are, they are a liability if they're going to be patrolling black and brown neighborhoods. So we really have to know who these police officers are. There was another point he made at the end. I got to start writing stuff down because, you know, I'm 50 now and the memory is not what it used to be.
We'll go to Joe, Island Park, New York. Go ahead.
Just two terms that you were speaking about, Mr. Bryant, before when you said integrity. And I just want to say respect and comply.
Okay, sounds like that was it. Here's what's amazing. That is two beautiful words that white people love to use. All you had to do is respect. All you had to do is comply. That is absolutely truth, and it's absolutely foolishness. Because Philando Castile, sir, did comply with everything the police officer told him to do, and told the police officer, I have a firearm. And the police officer said, well, what I want you to do is get it and show me your firearm card. And guess what? As soon as that black man moved, who was complying and being respectful, he got killed. George Floyd, sir, also a police officer who he was complying and he was very respectful. He even called the police officer sir multiple times, and guess what happened to him? He got killed. So I believe white people, not all, many white people have this myth that police officers, generally speaking, are these good, great people. Many of them are. The myth of a few bad apples is a lie. Let me prove that. Over 35,000 police officers in America have lost their certification. Nearly 4,000 of them for drug and alcohol in their system. Nearly 2,000 of them for sexual assault, mostly assaulting Black and Hispanic women. Nearly 3,000 of them for robbery, another 2,000 for theft. So when we look at a few bad apples, we really need to get our facts straight, because I know there's a population in America who don't like science, they don't like facts, they prefer opinions. I'm cool with opinions as well, but I like facts a little bit better. It makes me sound and seem a little bit more intelligent when I go with facts. So the facts are, that's 35,000 have been disbarred. Over $85,000 have been investigated, as well as received some level of not detention, but reprimands. In New York, they just released their files. 323,911 officers have had several complaints against them. California was so ridiculous, they burned their police files because they did not want to get them released. Chicago, with the Invisible Institute, just released their files. Over 100,000 complaints, and literally less than 3% were investigated. So when I hear ignorant statements such as comply and respect, I say, sir, I appreciate your statement. I wish I had the white privilege that you have, that you can do that and say, what the F are you stopping me for, and not get shot. I'm a black man in America. I do not have that privilege, but I always say this. If a police officer can treat me like a white man, I'm cool. If you can't treat me like a white man, treat me like a white person's dog. I'm okay with that. But when you treat me like a black man, I might get shot, and that's not what I want to do.
The book, you talk about this concept of bad apples as far as how to kind of change police forces from within, especially those who may have these kind of issues. Can you kind of summarize that for the viewing audience?
Sure. Well, when I discuss the bad apples, that's not in the stop, because I wrote the stop, believe it or not, 5 years ago, even though it's just as applicable today. What I just completed is a 17-part online series called The New Conversation, because we need a new conversation in America. We're tired of that same old conversation that won't hunt. So in The New Conversation on the website, I talk about a few bad apples. We break down the different statistics. We talk about the ones I just mentioned who've been decertified. We talk about why. We look at the different states of what's going on. We talk about different police reform, because here's the deal. Right now, the second most crucial pandemic in America is police brutality. Number one is COVID. Number two is police brutality, because we're losing too many lives to this. So therefore, what I talk about in that series is solutions, what everyone can do in the community. It's not just a police problem, it's a police and community problem. Both sides have criminals that they shield, that they protect, and if we're really serious about improving police-community relations, both sides have to stop shielding and protecting their criminals, and I lay it out brilliantly and beautifully in that 17-part online series.
The book that the guest had referenced, The Stop Improving Police and Community Relations, we're talking with Dwayne Bryant. Connecticut is next in Rockville. Susan, good morning.
Good morning. Amen, Mr. Bryant. I'm so glad you're on, because I've had this question for a while. I've been in since March 12th because of the pandemic, and I watched Mayor de Blasio briefing every day, and a journalist said to him, why did they get rid of the requirement that police officers in New York not have to live in the city? And he said, oh, because it's too expensive for police officers to live in the city. And the journalist followed up and said, but the administrative people that work with the police department, they live in the city. So I wondered, would it be better if they had that requirement, because at least it wouldn't be like police officers going into like a foreign land with their fear and strapping up, and maybe it would be part of the solution. What does it say about our cities that people accept this idea that the police officers on their salary can't afford to live in cities like Chicago and New York?
Sure. Susan, that is a beautiful question. My answer is yes and no. Should police have to live in the communities they serve? I think it's a great idea, because that brings back the concept that Dr. Lee P. Brown introduced, community policing. When you are a part of the community, you have more respect, you have more knowledge, and also the community has more respect for you versus an invading force or an outsiding force that's here to just patrol or sometimes even terrorize communities. However, just because you may live in a community does not make you a better officer. For instance, if I am a racist, I don't care what community I live in, my mind, my heart, my thoughts, and my actions are going to be the same no matter what community I live in. So to me, it's not so much about location, it's about your who you are as an individual. If I go and live in an all-white community, an all-Jewish community, an all-Spanish community, an all-African community, I'm not going to get there and all of a sudden start harming people or stealing from my neighbors or robbing them or shooting their dogs. I'm not going to do that, because that's not who I am. So that's why we have to find out, who are these police officers? What type of mental capacity do they have? What kind of implicit, explicit bias training have they received? What kind of verbal judo have they received? What kind of reactions do they have? A black 16-year-old boy, and they thought he was a 40-year-old man. Those are the problems that we're seeing. And Dr. Atiba Goff, I have him in my book, many of his research and his studies, where he talks about the different ways police officers dehumanize Black kids. So personally, you don't have to live in my community to respect me, to uphold the law, to not break your own laws. And I'd rather have a police who didn't live in my community, who is a professional, versus one who does live in my community, but who is terrorizing my community. So I understand the premise of that. I support it. It's not 100% necessary. It depends on the officer.
To follow up on the reactions that law enforcement can do, this is Libby Jane off Twitter. She asks that Leo departments, law enforcement offices, have access to several non-lethal means to subdue a subject, taser, clubs, and handguns that expel rubber pellets. She advises use these instead of killing a suspect.
I think it makes perfectly good sense. I have no question with that. However, let me say this. There are times when lethal force is necessary. When we did some of the simulations at the FBI Citizens Academy, I had the firearm in my hand. And on this lethal screen, literally, we were going to guys who were known white supremacists, who were known to be peddling drugs, and the guy was belligerent. Literally, I can feel my blood. I know it was a computer screen, but I can feel my body going and getting prepared. So when the man actually pulled his gun, I took him out quickly and had no second thoughts about it. But it's because there are times when lethal force is necessary. There are times when a rubber bullet and a taser is not going to do the trick, because I hate to say this, but America is a drug out nation. There are people walking around who are on PCP and all kinds of illicit drugs that makes them stronger, that makes them more aggressive, that makes their mental capacities not where it should be. So if a police officer is up against that, they're not up against a regular human being. So lethal force is sometimes necessary, not always.
Here is Gary in Connecticut. Go ahead, Gary.
Good morning. I just wanted to say that I've been outraged at all of the shootings of Black individuals. It's just horrifying to me. But I wanted to make the point, going back, I'm in my 70s, and going back to my childhood, I worked in a movie theater that shared an alley with a sort of a cabaret. And my job that evening was to put the letters on the marquee. And I was going back and forth with letters, and there was a disturbance at the cabaret, and there were a number of police officers there, and one of them grabbed me and threw me against the wall and put a club in my throat because someone had made a snarky comment, not me, from someone else, and wouldn't even let me explain that I was doing my job. I was working there. I wasn't interfering with them. So that was one of a couple of unpleasant encounters I've had with abusive police officers. It wasn't the last. There were two or three, and I've been a clean-cut, hard-working, college-educated American, and but I do think that it's gotten worse now than it was when I was a kid.
Okay, Gary, thank you for your comment. Here's what's interesting. Believe it or not, it's actually gotten better. According to the data, police shootings, particularly of unarmed Black men, have decreased nearly 70% from the 60s. So that's not to say it's good at all. But here's what's amazing. That means that in the 60s, police were just killing Black men randomly anytime they wanted to. And we think about the assassination of many of our leaders. That was welcome. That was wanted. Detroit, Chicago, Atlanta, LA, you can name the city, and it was going on. Because we have cell phones now, it seems like it's actually worse than, I'm not going to say worse than it is, because it is absolutely terrible. However, the police shootings of unarmed Black and brown people have actually gone down. That's just some facts that if you see the online 17-part series, you'll see that. However, it's still completely unnecessary. It's really high, and it's higher than what it needs to be when we look at the actual videotape and the footage.
Can we extend the conversation to what we're seeing in some cities across the United States with issues taking place in some of these cities, and this stemmed from some of these shootings that you've been talking about? What do you see, and what should be done?
Well, when you say that, can you be a little bit more specific so I can answer?
So some of these protest riots that people describe them in Portland and other places, this stemming from the death of George Floyd and other shootings, what do you think of those incidents, and what should be done in those incidents?
Got it. So let's take George Floyd. We can look at Breonna Taylor. We can look at the young man in, I believe it's Denver, Isaiah. I'm sorry, it's so many, I don't always remember the names. We can look at many different instances. So what's amazing is when we see the footage, like George Floyd, when we see that this man complied, this man did everything that the law enforcement asked. Breonna Taylor was in her home. The police came to the wrong address. Now we find out that the whole city government is trying to move black people out of their homes so they can regentrify with the developer. Okay, that's a whole different situation. We saw that the guy in, I believe it was Denver, was killed by police, and then the police went to his graveyard and posed in pictures and making fun of him dead. So when people begin to see that we have some people in uniform who are just not good people, and they're being protected, they're being shielded, then what happens is that makes a neighborhood angry. Because how do we trust the people that we're supposed to trust, and they have proven themselves unworthy of trust? So what we're seeing around America is the same thing we saw in 1776, when Americans said, we're tired of the Britons, we're tired of their unfair practices, we're tired of their oppressive government and their oppressive policing, so what are we going to do? We're going to declare independence, and we're going to burn some stuff down. We're going to destroy some buildings. So this looting and destruction is not new in the fabric of American history. It's always been done. We liked it in 1776. We don't like it now because something else is shifting. Now it's not just black people looting and rioting and destroying neighborhoods. It's white young people, because white kids are playing with black kids. They listen to the same music. They're dating each other. So when their parents, with some of their views, the white kids are like, this is not true. My friend is pretty cool. So Portland, my Lord, how many days has it been now? Those are not white people. Black people don't burn down police departments. We don't even want to go to the police department. So now America has a bigger problem because, see, white people have a privilege that we don't have. We don't destroy the way they do. And now that they're saying we want systemic change, they're going to get it, or else America's going to have a bigger problem on its hands very soon.
Such as what?
Well, we have one police department burnt down. You may have more. We have different courtrooms that are on fire. You may have more. What people are saying, my friend, is that we want justice. We want to stop protecting and shielding unlawful criminal officers working in police departments. They need to be prosecuted. That's all people are asking. And personally, I think it's fair. We don't want to harm the good police officers. We don't want to touch them. We want them in our neighborhoods. We want them patrolling our streets. But the one who are criminalizing communities, we're not going to stand for that. And it's a simple problem. Everyone, police and community, give up your criminals. Stop allowing your criminals to terrorize neighborhoods. And guess what? We can be human beings again. It's pretty simple.
We'll hear from Bruce in Denver, Colorado for our guest, Dwayne Bryant. He's the author of The Stop: Improving Police and Community Relations. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for taking my call. My quick comment is that, and I'll stick to Colorado, that for some reason it gets this narrative that blacks aren't for law and order, which we are. I'm 57, and I remember just jokingly when I was like 10, made a comment about, calling the cops the pig and stuff. And my mom and dad almost backhanded me out of the table. So they said, you respect officers. But in my state, it's amazing how, like you were saying, that, I don't know, white officers seem to think that blacks are more prone. And I can't remember the exact dates, but in my state, the 3 officers that I've known that have been murdered over the last 20 years, one was by a white supremacist. Another one got shot by a 15-year-old kid in the head, and another guy got shot responding to a domestic violence at a Safeway. Now, I can't remember the exact years, but in all cases, these shooters were all white and the officers were white. So I don't get this idea how these white officers think that every time they approach a black person, that, we're going to do them harm and stuff like that. Because like I said, in my state alone, I can tell you that here, and even I think a few years ago, back in 2009 or 2010, a guy got released from prison. I forgot what it was. He was a white supremacist, and he killed a guy working at a pizza place, stole his uniform, went down to Monument, which is a little bit down from Denver, and killed a correctional officer who was white and everything, and then ended up getting killed himself in Texas. So that was my comment. I just don't really seem to understand why white officers seem to think that we're going to be more of a threat when they throw out TV, that guy Cliven Bundy, he points weapons at federal officers. About a week or so after that shooting down in El Paso, another guy in Ohio was white, heavily armed white men who were pointing weapons at officers. They talked them down. Or like Dylan Roof, who went and shot some people, in that church, and they buy him Burger King. But when you're unarmed and black and everything, all of a sudden you're this threat.
Okay, Bruce, we'll leave it there. We'll let our guests respond.
Sure. First of all, Bruce, you're absolutely correct. But that's why we must understand the history of America. And I know we have many white folk, including our wonderful President Donald Trump, who wants to pretend that racism does not exist, slavery is a thing of the past, and it has no implication of the present. Those are all lies, okay? Those are all lies. Here's the deal. Black people have been criminalized in this country since they came here in 1619, even though we were here before 1619. However, let's look at a couple of things. Black on black crime. We always hear about black on black crime. Black people kill more black people, white people kill more white people, Hispanics kill more Hispanic people, but we never hear white on white crime because in America, it is a crime to be black. The other thing, blacks are known for drugs and things of this nature. According to the FBI files, white teens use way more drugs than black teens. However, when we think about the drugged out teen, we think about black people. When we hear crack, we think about black people. So everything that black people do, and this may be, they say I speak in hyperbole, but what black people do gets criminalized. Black people go and tear up stuff. They're looters, they're rioters. When white people do it, they're just a bunch of rambunctious teens. When black people get Hurricane and Katrina, they're looters, they're refugees. When white people have it, oh my God, these poor innocent white people, we need FEMA, we need help. So black people, historically speaking, have been treated differently in this country because this country was found on white supremacy. This country systems, education, healthcare, government, legislative, criminal justice, media, religion has been found on white supremacy. So white supremacy, and I talk about this quite a bit, is one of the greatest evils in this nation across the world because it makes white people feel as though they're better just because they're white and you're worse just because you're black. And factually speaking, there is no factual proof to prove white supremacy. There's no proof other than military power, other than killing people, destroying people's civilizations, and committing genocide on people. Outside of that, there is no proof that white supremacy is a real thing, and we need to get away from that foolishness.
Here's Ken from Michigan. Good morning. Go ahead.
Hey, how you doing, Mr. Bryant? I've noticed two things. The first comment I wanted to make is I am for equal justice, and I think a lot of folks really are for equal justice. I believe racism exists. I believe it exists on all sides, though. There's as many black racists who believe they're superior as there probably are white, proportionally. And here's my question for you. With that in the background, you talked about the amount of white supremacist police officers. In New York City, 48% of the police force is black. How do you describe, in Chicago, 28%. You can look these facts up yourself. Anyone wants to Google it? I did it 5 minutes ago. When you look at the amount of, I'll call it balance, white, black, Hispanic, however you want to say it, you're trying to say that these police, a large portion of the police are treating the people differently. When you have a 48% black police force, how do you describe or how do you somehow rationalize the same thing? Have all these wonderful black police officers gone rogue? Please give me your comments. I'm interested.
Hey, first of all, Ken, I want to say thank you for being for equal justice. I appreciate that, and we need more people like you. Second thing, I think I'm going to challenge your stats on 28% of officers in Chicago are black and 48%. I'm not sure what you said. Now, I don't believe the majority of police officers are bad or racist. I don't believe so. I said I believe it's probably about 20%, which is nowhere near a majority. However, that 20% can create havoc in any city and any police department around America. Just like when we have mentoring programs in schools, if you have a classroom with 25 students, if you have 20% of the students are acting a fool all the time, that's like only 5 students, okay? However, that 20% can disrupt the entire classroom and overrun it and make it very difficult for the teacher. So I will never say, and if I did say that, then I want to apologize. I will never say I believe the majority of police officers, white or black, are bad, because I don't think so. I believe the majority of them are decent. However, I believe the majority of them lack the level of leadership that we need to make sure that they keep their officers, their comrades in check when they're violating human rights, when they're violating people's constitutional rights, when they're violating the oath that they've been sworn to protect and serve. Now, let me share some information with you. Black people feel pretty much the same way about black police officers that they do white police officers, because black police officers can be unruly as well. However, we would prefer a black police officer because a black police officer is less likely to kill us for no apparent reason, whereas a racist white officer will do it without any second thought, knowing I thought they had a gun, my life was in danger. They know the rules, they know the words that will get them off. So we're not gung-ho about black officers just because they're black. We're gung-ho about professional police officers, and that's what we're asking for to be patrolling our neighborhoods.
Mr. Bryant, in Congress, we saw the House pass legislation when it comes to certain police practices. We saw that being attempted in the Senate from the Republicans and not passing. We saw an executive order on the same. Is this a legislative solution on any front as far as some of those practices by police?
Sure. I believe it was Dr. King that said you can't legislate someone's heart. I think legislation is good. I think if it has teeth, then you can ensure that there's a level of accountability. I think it's beyond legislation. I think it's about having human beings interact, to conversate, to have intelligent dialogue, to understand what are my biases. Guess what? We all have biases. Ken just mentioned black racism. My definition of racism is the ability to infect or affect systems that can systematically destroy, deny, suppress, oppress the people. We have a few black people in this country that are powerful, maybe Oprah, maybe LeBron James, maybe Jay-Z. Neither of them, together with all of their money, have the power to affect systems that can systematically destroy white people. So I'm going to push back on the black people being racist thing, because I don't think we have that level of power in this country. But I do believe those policies are necessary. I do believe if you're intelligent and you're a politician, right now, 92% of black people believe there's a systemic problem with policing in America. 75% of Hispanic, 7% of white, 92% Democrat, 55% of Republican. And I talk about this on my online series. If you have an ounce of intelligence and you're a politician, if you're not talking police reform, you probably won't be in office long. On another front, then, the Department of Justice has a certain role in overseeing, looking at cases, in some of these cases, shootings and the like. What do you think of their oversight? Sure. I absolutely love what the Department of Justice did in around 2015, 2016. They went to different cities. Chicago is one, Baltimore is one, Ferguson is one, and they found many patterns and practice of excessive use of force, violating citizens' constitutional rights, shooting at moving vehicles, which is against policy. I'm talking about, it was almost like these are rogue police officers doing whatever the HE double toothpicks that they wanted to do. So I think we need that kind of oversight. We need the Department of Justice to come down, because what has happened is many people say, oh my God, if people just respect the police and comply, it won't be a problem. But we have an intelligent agency called the Department of Justice that came down and said, it doesn't matter if you're complying. It doesn't matter if you're being respectful. If you are black and brown, you might get treated a certain way just because this particular officer, usually white male, usually under 37 years old, it's not me, it's the facts, and usually what's going on. So we need more Department of Justice inquiries of what's going on in police departments. We need more accountability, and we also need more organizations like COPA, Civilian Office of Police Accountability in Chicago, who can investigate police misconduct. From Lancaster, Virginia, James, hello.
Yes, sir. My question to the author there is, did he ever think that his first encounter with the police officers, that if he did not steal the bikes, it would never been an encounter in the beginning? And the second thing is the black community do have power. Just look at the vice president that Biden picked to run as his running mate. There was 100 influential black people that wrote a letter saying who to pick, and he picked. So I'm just confused about this. Right is wrong is wrong. Not stealing the bikes would have never put you in the spot in the beginning. And your mama did the right thing, because that's what my mama would have done to me. Thank you.
Hey, James, first of all, brother, I want to say I love you. And here's the funny thing, right? So chapter 1, it's not called stolen bikes, it's called borrowed bikes. Because here's what you have to think about. The prefrontal cortex, we all have one, hopefully, and it affects your ability to have sound reasoning, judgment, long-term decision, short-term decision-making. We just thought, hey, we're just going to jump on these bikes. We're going to have some fun for about 10 minutes before mom gets here and bring them back. So in our heads, there's nothing in us that thought we were stealing. We were borrowing the bikes because we've done this several times and nothing has ever happened and we came right back. So to your point, let's say if you may have been that officer, let's say if you may have dehumanized us and said, look at these black thieves, these crooks, these criminals, let me block them up now before they become, guess what? My brother and I have graduated from college. I went on a full academic scholarship. He's a contractor in Georgia, have built $100 million projects. If that officer would have locked us up, dehumanized us, it is very likely that our whole lives would have been changed by going to juvenile. So police have powerful discretion, and I think many of them know the discretion that they have, which is why they choose to do what they do. So to answer your question, we didn't steal the bike, sir. We borrowed the bike, sir, as in chapter 1, but I do appreciate that. I'm glad you had a good mama, too. Kamala Harris. I support Kamala Harris. She was definitely my pick. I love some of the things she's done in police reform, but I also studied, that she was not on black people, and she has something of a controversial history as well, because she was considered the top cop. She liked and was praised by law enforcement until she did not uphold the death penalty. So I think she's a perfect candidate for Joe Biden because she understands both sides. She understands the police side, she understands the community side, and I also think she has the heart for justice. I also believe that she has the mental capacity, and the mental toughness that she can make the proper decisions to hold law enforcement accountable, but also not just take the sides of the community, but she also has a standard for the community as well, and she wants both to improve. So Kamala Harris, you got my vote. So on that front, I'm sure you've heard as much as many in this conversation about who the next president, about Joe Biden and his work on the '94 crime bill. What's your opinion of that bill, and particularly what it did towards African Americans? Oh man, this is why you're on this station, because you ask great questions. So my answer is this. Nixon, 72, war on drugs, criminalizing black people. Reagan doubled down on it, 1980 something, 82, 84, war on drugs, just say no, double down. President Clinton, black people gave him a pass as the first black president, BS. Bill Clinton locked up more black people than the Bushes did, but he got a pass. He no longer gets a pass. I believe, and I think it's, what is it called, the omnibus crime bill or whatever it's called, the 3 strikes and you out was detrimental to the black community. Because again, according to the stats, black people use drugs just as much as white people, sell drugs just as much as white people, but white people get off. They are not criminalized. Now we had millions of these men locked up. Now we've legalized drugs, but they can't participate in the revenue stream from the illicit drugs that they got locked up for. To me, that is criminal in and of itself. I don't support that. Now, Joe Biden, as Donald Trump calls him, Sleepy Joe, but Donald Trump calls everybody everything. So here's the deal. I believe we have to leave room for people to grow. I believe we have to leave room for people to evolve. I believe we can make a mistake like I did borrowing bikes, which was theft, as our caller just said. However, now I won't take anything from anyone. So I do believe that we have to give people room to grow and evolve. So I'm not going to hold that against him as long as he understands where we are today, where we are with the need for accountability with law enforcement. And I believe Kamala Harris will keep him mindful of some of the mistakes that he made, because she did that during the campaign. So everyone gets a break. Everyone should get a pass. I'm going to give him that one. But if he keeps messing up, I don't guarantee. First of all, I'm not a Democrat. Let me say that first of all. So don't assume you're going to get my vote because I'm black.
So let me take one step further then. Looking at President Trump, he often cites his efforts on criminal reform, cites the work of the First Step Act and the like. What do you think his influence has been overall?
Well, here's the deal, right? When you tell a police officer, hey, if you arrest them, if you happen to tighten up the handcuffs a little bit, if you happen to knock them in the head, dude, what you're saying is it's okay to criminalize people. It's okay. So you can't write legislation but say something else. It's considered inconsistent. It's considered bipolar. It's considered, just mentally unstable. So we can't do both. Now, do I think the policy or the executive order is the first step in the right direction? Absolutely. From a Republican president, and guess what? I'm not Republican either, so don't get excited or don't get your self twisted up. Without that, I'm independent. So I believe it was a step in the right direction. I believe it can have more teeth. It can have more accountability. Any legislation that is not looking at these police unions is not doing enough, because it is the police unions that is helping to aid and abet the havoc that we're seeing across America.
So let me jump in another quick question, because you brought it up, the topic which unions bring up and others bring up, that of qualified immunity.
I think we need to end qualified immunity, because here's the deal. If you have the right to kill me, to destroy me, to dehumanize me, to assassinate me, to plant drugs on me, and you do it intentionally, and I cannot go after you and your assets, I believe that's the problem. I think it's if everyone that's watching this, if they go to YouTube and go to Dwayne Bryant, DWAYNE BRYNT, I have a piece on there called The White Lie. And in The White Lie, what I'm talking about is how over time, many people have lied and said certain things about blacks that did not happen, and it created crazy chaos and crazy problems. But in that, I'm talking about the need why qualified immunity, the only way to end supremacy is loss of revenues or loss of life. That's the only way to end it. And loss of revenues is if you can sue this police officer for civil damages, then they may think twice about killing you. Loss of life is not saying go out and start killing officers. That's absolutely crazy and absolutely bananas. But loss of life of white supremacy, the mentality of white supremacy has to end, because it's telling you that I'm better than you just because I'm white. Because I stop you, because I drive a Mercedes, you must be a drug dealer, you must be a gangbanger. That cannot happen today, because what's going on is many people are being criminalized when it's completely unnecessary. So go check out The White Lie on YouTube, and you will see a lot of different things that are going on that we can solve. And part of that is we got to figure out this white supremacy stuff, because that is the foundation of all of these things that are going wrong. And white people are not the only white supremacists. To the other guy's point, some black people are white supremacists as well.
A few more minutes with our guest from Texarkana, Texas. Ben, good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Bryant.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to bring to focus, when we're talking about these bad acting police, I'm reminded of Joe about a week and a half ago. They showed this film on TV that was in a city in Colorado. These 3 police officers stopped these black girls. The oldest was 17, and the other 3 I think was the oldest one of them was 6. They took them out of the car, had them face down on the hot concrete. They stopped these kids because of their license plates. They had the same number license plate as a stolen motorcycle, but the stolen motorcycle plate was from a different state. But they put these kids face down on the hot ground. Now I know these officers, they have ways to contact their headquarters and found out that the vehicle they were looking for was a motorcycle, not a car, and that the license plate was from another state and not Colorado.
So with that story in mind, caller, what do you want our guest to address specifically?
I just want this action brought to the public because you hear all kinds of things going on, but you don't hear anything about that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bryant, if you wanted to respond to that.
Hey, I love the way you move your callers on because you're like me, little patience, little tolerance for long conversation. Here's the deal. Those officers have police discretion. They did not ever have to put those girls on the hot concrete, and I didn't see it, so I usually have learned not to speak too much on something that I don't really fully know about. However, if they were their daughters, if they even looked like their daughters or their nieces and nephews, I can almost guarantee you they would not have done that. And that's why we have to talk about dehumanization, implicit, explicit bias, because when we have police officers who do things like that, it puts a stain on the community about them and about their mentality. Who lays any human being on the hot concrete? Now, granted, they don't know who they are. Did they steal the vehicle? Well, guess what? If they're in handcuffs, what harm are they going to do? They could be in handcuffs in the back of their police car while they run the investigation. They have to run the investigation and find out what are they here for, what are they doing, because they could be criminals. Some black people are criminals. Some black people need to be locked up. Let's be for real. However, not all black people. You cannot criminalize an entire race.
We've got a few more minutes left with our guest, Jeannie from Great Falls, Montana. Jump right in with your question or comment.
Yes, hi, good morning. I have about 4 comments I'd like to bring up, and then
we're not, Jeannie, I'm sorry, we're not going to have time for all of them. So what's your top one?
Okay, I was just going to say, how would he like us, how are we going to be able to fund and help the police and make them more accountable if we're defunding the police at the same time? And I come from a small community, and we don't see this, kind of thing. So I just feel like it could be something could be taken care of at all levels rather than just one big, trying to fix it all at one time. And I know that this has been an ongoing situation.
Jeannie, thank you. Oh, we'll have to leave it there. I apologize. Mr. Bryant, go ahead.
Hey, Jeannie, hopefully we'll get to your other questions if they invite me back another time. Regarding fund, defund, that's a beautiful question. The answer is simply this. If you have less than 20% of the police officers violating, committing more crimes where the taxpayer, for instance, in Chicago from 2004 to 2020, almost $1 billion have been paid out because of police misconduct. That's a cost. We're not looking at the cost of having unprofessional police officers on police departments. They are a liability. No one likes liabilities. So what do? You fire your liabilities. You do not give them pensions. You fire those crooks because they are criminalizing people, and it's costing police departments problems. Honestly, if police departments did that, we wouldn't have to defund anything because we would not be looking for this whole police reform. Many police officers have brought this upon their departments, unfortunately, and now they have to suffer the consequences of their actions. So if the police chief, if the police union have leadership and get rid of these officers, we would not be having this problem. This is not about let's just defund police for the fun of it so we can have criminals running around in the community. No, what we're saying is let's get rid of the criminals in the police department. Let's get rid of the criminals in the community. Let's lock all of them up and put them together since they like to play together. And then let's have law-abiding, decent, professional officers patrol our streets, and let's increase police funding. Let's give them the mental health they need. Let's make sure that they have the insurance so they can have the counseling and the wraparound services that they need, because who really wants to be a police officer? Most people don't, and most people could not do the job.
Dwayne Bryant, the author of The Stop, Improving Police and Community Relations. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate it, and I hope I answered the questions appropriately.